Welcome back to the Renaissance Space podcast, where we have the opportunity to listen and better understand life and education. I'm delighted to be speaking to Jeffrey Boakye, who is the recipient of our Quiz Writer's Choice Book Award at the What Kids Are Reading event in 2023. His book, Musical Truth, is a wonderful playlist capturing a lovely selection of different music genres. His first podcast, Are You Really an English Teacher?, has been downloaded hundreds of times. And as an author, broadcaster, and educator with a particular interest in issues surrounding race, masculinity, education, and popular culture, not surprisingly, I was really keen to talk to him again. So welcome, Jeffrey. 2 years ago since we spoke. Where did that time go?
Yeah, two years, 2 short years, but also 2 busy years. Since then, since Musical Truth was nominated and crowned winner of that particular award, I shall keep reminding myself that I've been very busy writing. Actually, Musical World has followed, which is a similar project in the vein of using popular music to explore big conversations, but going wider, going pan-global, going into all the various conversations that I think need to be had surrounding social justice, politics, many other things. So Musical World was quite a big moment for me because it was an ambitious book that was written in the past 2 years. I've also expanded the Kofi universe. So my middle grade series, Kofi and the Rap Battle Summer, that was the first book, grew into Kofi and the Secret Radio Station. You can see them behind me somewhere. Hold on, let's have a look. There we go. You can see them there. And so I'm expanding the Kofi universe, 1990s historical fiction. To young readers, you might as well be writing Victorian England. And also just spending a lot of time with educators, with various institutions, with schools, teachers, talking about the things that I like to write about: education, identity, social justice, and all of the things that you might find in my books for adults and for kids. So yeah, busy 2 years writing and spreading the good word, I suppose.
Yeah, and joy and truth, I think you held as 2 key themes in your work. And if we were to capture that within the context of teachers and parents, how would you suggest we reignite a love of reading in classrooms, well, and at home, actually?
I think it's essential to remember a very simple fact, that we cannot hide from the truths of the world. We cannot hide from the truths of history. And actually, we do ourselves a disservice as a people when we pretend that certain things haven't happened. Now, this means that we're often leaning away from essential conversations. And this is why that a lot of the curriculum put in front of kids, or a lot of the literature put in front of kids, doesn't talk about certain things because they're difficult to talk about. And actually, the world is not a well place. And you might argue the world has never been an entirely well place. But that truth is really important to me. That's why I called Musical Truth, because if you don't talk about what actually happened, forget trying to solve it, forget having an opinion or a debate, just what actually happened. That's the first important thing. And our young people need to know, because otherwise you're patronizing them, because they can handle conversations about inequality, about conflict, about injustice, about some of the worst things that happen. And if you deny them the chance to even engage with those conversations, you're risking the same things happening again and again and again. So part of what I do in terms of my nonfiction work in particular is to try to reveal truths in order to empower readers to not be shackled to some of the problems that have been created before them, that they've been born into. But then you have to have joy. I genuinely believe that we only get one run, and everything has to be centered in joy and relationships and connectivity, all the things that any human being will tell you is important. I mean, we're not that complicated, really. Come on. If a baby cries, you want to make sure it's not crying anymore. So I feel as though centering truth and joy, having a sense of joy, even when you're discussing difficult things, I think is important. And it's no accident that I will use something like music to discuss politics and history and culture, because music is essentially joyful, even when it's expressing pain and trauma. So I feel as though, yeah, that's my thesis. What do you think of that? There you go.
I I I think it's absolutely fascinating, and I think it's so important that we remember some of those key elements, which are actually fairly fundamental. It's not writing fiction for fiction's sake. What we want to do is engage children in the page, and that sort of leads quite nicely. I actually listened to your keynotes for the National Literacy Trust. It was to librarians, I believe, and you were talking about how people can be defined by a pie chart. I'm sure you put it much better than that, but you were talking about, what a pie chart would look like if you were thinking about who you were and what you stood for and what you needed. Well, what does a Jeffrey Boakye pie chart look like?
Oh, that's an interesting question. All right, now I really am on the therapist couch. Here we go. I mean, it's just a very simple idea that identity is multifaceted. And I think that's something which it sounds obvious to say, right? But our education system, society at large, does try to do a one size fits all number on people. Schools have got uniforms for a reason, for crying out loud. But everyone is very, very idiosyncratic. Everyone's got a number of pieces of the puzzle that makes them them. And actually, some of these pieces might be at conflict or at odds with mainstream dominant identities. So very quickly, you get to this point where every single person is having to navigate the world based on the way it sees them, based on the component parts of themselves. And it is everything from your gender to your nationality, to your ethnicity, to your racial background, to your socioeconomic background. And then it goes even further to your hobbies, to your interests, to the things that make you you, the experiences that you've had. And that means they're all really complex people. But the reason why I like to dwell on that complexity is because that's when it gets interesting, and that's when it gets important and empowering. That's why we have books, surely, because books give us multiple perspectives. They give us multiple stories. They give us windows into experiences and narratives that we haven't had. And that's why reading still exists. I mean, why on earth do we still have books in the 21st century? What's the point?
Yeah.
But the point is very simple, that they're a great way of drawing people into experiences that they haven't had. There you go. That's the pie chart conversation.
It is the pie chart conversation, and listening, sort of linking back into the National Literacy Trust. They do an annual literacy survey. I don't know if you do know that, but sadly, a very concerning decline in students reading. So only just about 35% of children enjoy reading. You're a former teacher, as you've already talked about. You're currently lecturing PGCE students, so you obviously spend a lot of time thinking about the role of education. But it's not just books, is it, in the classroom? It's so much more.
No. I feel like sometimes we sort of get it wrong by focusing on texts as in books, and we think books are the thing that kids aren't reading, and we panic. But humans will never stop engaging with stories, and humans can't help but place narratives onto things that are happening. The news cycle is a series of narratives with winners and losers and villains and heroes, and it fluctuates depending on where you place yourself. Your day is a story. If you spend hours on social media, you're just mainlining narratives and stories and characters. So this fear that kids aren't reading, first of all, kids are reading the world the whole time. Like, you can't stop reading the world. The worry is that kids aren't engaging with this incredible medium, which is the book. Be it a novel, which is an amazing thing because it's an interior world exposed through creative right. Like, that's an amazing thing. You can't do that any other way. It's so immersive psychologically. Or be it non-fiction books like textbooks or history books or theoretical books or debates. And I think the thing that we're rightly worried about, and I'm not sure who we are when I say that, but the thing that we're worried about is the fact that young people aren't engaging in some of these deeper narratives and these deeper thoughts that you get with books and with literature. And sometimes they're stopping at the easy stuff. Like social media just throws things at you and it's all a bit messy and superficial. Movies are great because movies are narratives done in a very tight format, but they're movies, they're sort of entertaining, they're doing something else. Books do this more immersive, more psychologically rewarding thing. In some ways, not just sophisticated in terms of language and style, but sophisticated in terms of emotions. And I think that is a legitimate concern, because that's something which you don't want to deprive any human of that. That's why that we make kids read. We know that literacy is a vital way into the world. We know that. And kids do read really well, actually. Every year, the stats go up in terms of how well kids read. But in terms of the breadth and the depth of their reading and their engagement with history and with the world and with the art form, of writing, that's the stuff which you don't want to lose. I've forgotten your first question, but those are my thoughts.
Well, my really, what I was trying to get from you, and you've done it beautifully, is to better understand what does reading actually mean. Children are very good at hiding the fact that they don't read very much, or maybe their reading ability. So, are they reading a book at the right level? It shouldn't all be down to that. It should be so much more, especially children who maybe have English as a second language and their vocabulary
100%.
is weak.
Definitely. I feel like if you prioritize the reasons why we share narratives and the reasons why we write stories and tell stories and listen to stories, then the way in which we consume those stories becomes secondary. Because I have never met a child in all of my years of teaching, and I did 16 years, which is in human years. That's about 150 years of normal life, because teaching is so demanding. In all my years of teaching, I've never met a child who wasn't deeply engaged with story, and who wasn't curious, and who wasn't willing to explore stories. And actually, a lot of the stuff that is written about is stuff that is incredibly exciting or provocative, or in some points in history even dangerous to even talk about experiences that some people are having. And I feel as though actually censoring that, you'll find that many people of all ages will become really thirsty for knowledge and for these conversations if you center the thing that's important. You can't just give a book to a kid and say, read it because it's medicine and because you need to read and you need to up your vocabulary. Like, no one wants to do that. If you say there's a story here about someone that's been through something, maybe someone like you, or maybe someone that you don't understand, maybe something that confuses you or something that excites you, then they are going to want to know more, So sparking that curiosity, I think, is important. Yeah. Oh, we're really solving the world's problems today, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. We're really going for it here. So one of the criticisms that we're hearing in the reading industry, for want of a better phrase, if you like, is that the term reading for pleasure almost trivializes the importance of reading, and it sort of fails to encourage people to choose the right books that support their literacy development. What are your thoughts on that debate?
I think that's really important, because this is a big conversation about, well, we're talking about social and economic systems, and this idea that there's this thing called pleasure and there's this thing called work, and work gets you money, and work is what you need, and that money allows you to have pleasure, and pleasure is leisure and sugar and fun things and not working. It's like, well, hang on a second. We know that actually the nourishing that we need as people isn't necessarily the same as having lots of fun. So when we say reading for pleasure, I feel as though that does, I agree fully, that minimizes the benefits of reading for nourishment, for reading for pushing towards truths, reading for healing. It's like doing regular exercise. It's not a case of it's enjoyable to get a bit out of breath doing something which isn't like sitting on the sofa, but it's good for you and it releases endorphins for a reason. And I think that reading is like that. There's pleasure to be had in thinking hard. There's pleasure to be had in being challenged, actually. It's a different kind of pleasure. And actually, if you look at someone's core values, most people's core values don't stop at, I just want to have a good time. It's usually about growth. People want to develop, people want to grow, people want to be the best version of themselves. And I think that those things, we might need to reimagine the word pleasure there, and maybe reading for
enjoyment,
reading for purpose, reading for growth. These are the things that we actually want, rather than just having a nice time and eating nice food and not doing any work.
Yeah,
but I am
being
a
on
workaholic,
expect
so maybe...
Absolutely. So I know when we spoke last time, we did talk about your life as a Black English teacher. We talked about the children's publishing space. But I'm sure what hasn't changed in the last 2 years is your ongoing concerns about the lack of diverse representation in UK publishing. And I just wonder if you'd like to comment on that.
Definitely. I mean, publishing, like any other industry or sector, is an arm of wider society, and wider society has been shaped in the West, in this project that we call the West, has been shaped in particular ways for particular reasons. So publishing, like everything else, like education, like the arts, like the criminal justice system, has a kind of post-colonial imperial foundation, which is fascinating to interrogate. I spend my life just exploring colonialism and imperialism and white supremacy and racism, because I'm trying to get a handle on it, and I'm trying to understand the world that we're in now. That's why I write the books that I write. I don't write books about race just because I'm Black and it's the only thing I can write about. It's because it helps me to understand the world, and I'm empowered by that knowledge. So publishing, as an arm of society, remember, it's doing something for a reason. It's serving its masters, just like every other arm of society. And it's no accident, or it's fairly unsurprising, that publishing is going to lean towards certain perspectives, certain historical narratives. It's going to, in this part of the world, the West, it's going to be, it's going to have an imperial, particularly in Britain, it's going to have, a British imperial overhang or shadow, which you see in the classics. They tend to have a certain perspective, a certain taste, a certain flavor. And you then see it in the narratives that are missing or obscured or omitted for different reasons from mainstream publishing conversations. So it's no accident that publishing looks the way it looks, and that certain books in the canon kind of happen to skirt around big stories that you need to know to understand Britain, because Britain only makes sense within a context of colonialism. You don't get Great Britain. And actually, which countries have got an adjective before their name? I always say that. Like, how many countries have got like Great Britain? Like, what is that even about? Like jumping Jamaica, like amazing Antigua. Like, no. So, that's the story, isn't it? Because that came out in the 1600s, I think. Yeah, that's a story.
We could have a great vocabulary quiz on that, couldn't we? And do sort of alliteration and
yeah, exactly.
Amazing, just wonderful.
Yeah. So publishing will always reflect this wider conversation. So the job is sometimes to interrogate what that is, I think.
So creating worlds for children, like the Kofi series, really, that sort of, magical, offering children a way into somewhere. We spoke about it briefly at the beginning. Somewhere safe, somewhere they can escape to, somewhere they can pretend to be part of. Supporting readers is one thing, but how do you really make sure that you're continuing to engage with the children or the age group within which you're operating?
I think the main thing is to not patronize them, which is something that can happen quite quickly in children's writing. For some reason, a lot of celebrities choose children's fiction as the way into their publishing careers, because there might be an assumption that children's writing is easier, or it's less sophisticated or less demanding. So let's just like knock out these books. It's the exact opposite, actually. I feel as though adult audiences are way more forgiving. Adult audiences can take a lot more excess in their stories, can bring more, and it's just a lot more patient maybe than kids. Actually, you need to be very direct and very honest. So when I'm writing for young audiences, I am not going to waste any time on anything which is non-essential, or anything which is drawing away from the heart of my story. So for me, writing for kids is really a test of my own integrity. So am I writing something just to make them laugh? You can do that. Anyone can write fart jokes or write books about poo that are hilarious because it's a taboo subject. I mean, you see that all over the shelves, and I'm not criticizing anyone, but that's an easy win. It's like the comedian that does offensive humor because it's like a shock and it makes people laugh. But no. What about books that talk about justice and friendship and honesty and adventure and learning and mistakes? What about that, and family and ambition and all these things that kids have in them in a huge levels? And I feel like speaking to that is going to be more important, and your books will still be exciting and funny and all the rest of it, but there'll be something important in them. So I think I try to hold my integrity close in terms of the way that I approach writing for children and for younger audiences. Yeah.
I think that's really interesting, and retaining that respect for your audience, no matter what their age, rather than the quick wins that we have seen by some in able to grasp it.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean making it overly complicated. I think that's why it's hard, actually, because you've got to be direct, and you have to be very skillful. I know that I'm bigging myself up now, but it takes a lot of skill to write something that works for a young audience, because you can't mess about with their time,
No,
So yeah,
no, especially if they're gently reluctant in the first place, then, obviously that's going to impact on their appetite and their stamina, and all of those things. So, just talking about stamina and digital, I just wanted to touch on this briefly, really, because obviously the digital world is all around us. Social media is all around us. I personally, with my primary school hat on, would be very sad if the well-thumbed books of Anthony Brown weren't available in a library for a child to sit on a beanbag to read. Can you just talk a little bit about, the digital reading space and how that features in your world?
yeah. I mean, if it was just a conversation about means of accessing literature, and it's just a case of let's move away from the weird bendy wood we call paper, and let's move towards screens now, that would be fine, because that's just how you access literature. But it's not that at all, is it? We know that the screen is a proxy for social media, for engaging with the internet, for finding circles and tribes online, for better or for worse. That's what the screen represents now. That's why there's a moral panic surrounding screens and screen time. And I feel as though when we talk about literature and what's happening in this digital time that we live in, we're really talking about the pull away from that slightly more introspective, slower, interrogative, reflective space that you get with reading and readers, to something which is more anxious. I think there's a lot of anxiety on the internet. Social media creates anxiety because the people that decided to create these platforms, they made it possible to count in interactions and engagements, which is awful, because you shouldn't know how many people are liking your content and then validating yourself based on these numbers. That's awful. And so there's a complete distraction away from the more healthy role of, or, job of life of just reflecting and exploring and wondering and thinking and creating. That's a way healthier place to be. And the internet doesn't necessarily encourage that. Even people who are very creative online, because there's a lot of incredibly creative people in the world. And if you look at social media, some of this stuff is gold. Like, people create these reels and little videos and hilarious things and really thought-provoking content. There's some amazing things you'll find on YouTube and TikTok. And But a lot of it is still just trying to grab your attention and keep you there. And it's been monetized. So the people consuming this content, it's not necessarily for their well-being. It's more for about their engagement. And that, I think, is actually quite dangerous, because imagine living your whole life without that breath of fresh air and that time taken to explore and to wonder, without the pressure of being judged all the time. And clicking, and the constant scrolling of content that you didn't necessarily seek out yourself. So then you become manipulated. And I think that's the big thing, which we see as social media is very manipulative. And we know where that can lead in terms of some very dangerous spaces, some very dangerous ideas can be seeded. So I think that's the real argument. That's the panic. And I totally see why. And I see how actually something like reading can be, if not an antidote to that, it can be an alternative space that allows people respite from the constant deluge of online distractions. And we need that respite. Yeah. Sorry, that was a long answer to a short question.
No, not at all. It's very interesting to hear you articulate, obviously, what you're experiencing, seeing and hearing about. So do you have a Kindle that you put in your backpack occasionally, or is it always a paper version?
I've still never gone down the Kindle route. They're incredibly convenient, aren't they? Kindles and Kobos.
Carrying more than one book.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Lugging a hardback book around the place. Like, what is that even all about?
So, as usual, Jeffrey, it's absolutely wonderful to talk to you. I feel so humbled to hear you talking about things that you know so much about, you're passionate about, you understand the space, and you're still happy to explore spaces that maybe haven't really been thought about and touched on. Is there anything else you would like to say that I haven't given you the opportunity to say or voice or share?
I suppose just that one of the things that I like to do in my writing is to demonstrate different ways that readers might shape their own thoughts. And no one ever takes me up on the offer. So whenever I write a book, I'm essentially telling people, you could do this process and it'd be really good for you. So I've written books that are playlists, and I think that everyone can do that. And I've written books that are lists of things I've heard. That's what I heard what you said is about, phrases. And I feel that everyone could do that as well. So I'm always trying to remind readers and people that talk to me about my work that I'm trying to model ways of writing, because I find that process so rewarding. And I think that's something which is important, because that can be taken out of schools as well. Just writing is intrinsically rewarding for the writer. It's not just about doing something for the audience. It's therapeutic, it's healing, it's empowering. It makes you grow because you have to seek and search. And you also have to be very resilient. So I feel like there's a two-hander here, reading, but also if you're a reader, you are a writer, whether you like it or not, because you're crafting meaning through your reading. And that's what a writer is. It's someone that's finding meaning. So I think that's the only thing that I'd like to add, to remind people to write and to think creatively as much as they're consuming. Yeah.
Lovely, a lovely answer. I mean, I often talk about speaking and listening, and when children are first starting out on the journey, the more they've heard, the more likely it is that they'll be able to read. And if they can read, they can write. And once they can write, then the world is open to them. So thank you for that PS, which was so much more than just that. We look forward to sharing this podcast with people far and wide, and I can't thank you enough.
No, listen, thank you. It's always a huge pleasure and privilege to be invited to speak on platforms, and to speak specifically to you, Margaret, is a huge pleasure. So thank you for carving out time. It's been great.
Wherever your place or space, I hope you enjoyed this interview as much as me. How could you not be enthused and engaged when somebody paints such a lovely picture surrounding reading. If you've enjoyed this episode of the Renaissance Space podcast, please take a moment to rate and review us wherever you listen to your podcasts. And don't forget, you can catch up on all previous episodes at uk.renaissance.com/resources/podcasts. And if you'd like to get in touch, please do email us at podcast@renaissance.com. Thank you so much for listening.